Standing. All right, then we are going to go into the next section here. We're going to talk about Woodrow Wilson's America a little bit. I'm going to go as long as I can. My voice is just about gone. So if it disappears in the middle of a lecture, that just means you all get off a little early, but that's how it goes sometimes. While I'm thinking about it, spring break, at least for us, is next week. I'm not sure when y'all's spring break is. I think they line up this time. So we will not have classes next week. So that's just kind of an information piece for you. All right. So to kind of set the mood here for Woodrow Wilson's America, let's look at these pictures here and talk about it. That first picture is from the most popular movie of the day. It was the original motion picture. It's a silent movie called Birth of a Nation. And in this movie, it's a pretty dreadful movie actually, but if you watch it, it's the Ku Klux Klan plays the heroes. Why do I put this up here? I put this up here because we're going to see that President Wilson has a screening of it in the White House, and he says it's like writing history with lightning, and he gives it lots of compliments. I like to show that to you because when it came out during the Wilson administration, we were still a very racist society, and I just want you to be aware that was going on. In fact, Wilson turned the clock backwards on a lot of improvements that Theodore Roosevelt had made to racism. That top right picture is Wilson at Versailles. We'll get to there at the end of this lecture where we have the Versailles Peace Treaty ending World War I. The bottom left picture is an American doughboy. That is what the well-dressed American soldier looked like going into combat. You can quickly see why they call them doughboys. They look kind of plump in those little outfits. That middle picture are the new types of war that we had. This new war has poison gas, it has airplanes, it has tanks, it has machine guns, it has trenches. It's a much more violent war than we ever had. And that bottom right is what a prisoner of war looks like during this, where they're greatly abused. All right, so let's get to know this time period a little bit. And Woodrow Wilson, and I apologize if that's hard to read. Part of what happens with this stuff is I designed these PowerPoints years and years ago, and then as PowerPoint changes, they stopped. The new templates sometimes change the way things look, so you end up with things that are sometimes kind of hard to read, and I apologize for that. All right, Woodrow Wilson is a Southern sympathizer. He is actually from Virginia originally, although he had grown up most of his life in New Jersey, had become a politician in New Jersey. He is still sympathetic to the Southern cause. He was a historian. In fact, he's what we call a lost cause historian. Very much believes that the South justifiably should have won the Civil War. He's on that lost cause side. He's also an Anglophile. What that means is he likes all things British. We're going to see how important that's going to be as he pushes us into World War I on England's side instead of Germany's side. It wasn't at all certain in 1917 which side we would enter the war on, but Woodrow Wilson is going to push us that direction. Because he's an Anglophile, he is going to like the way the British Parliament works. And in the British system of government, you move the argument through debate. So he sees public speaking or public oration as an art form. And he very much uses that model as president, very much the prime minister model, okay? He is one of those people, you all know him. You all know that one person that's smarter than everybody else in the room, but he's so smart that he can't function with regular people. Well, that's the way Woodrow Wilson was. He was always the smartest person in the room, which made him intolerant of stupidity. Here's the problem. He was so smart that everybody seemed stupid to him, okay? Which makes him a very intolerant person. He was a preacher for a little while, which means he's an idealist. He believes in black and white, and he believes that you can attain this almost perfect society. So he's always going to be fighting for the perfect. and kind of giving up on the good in order to get there. That's a philosophical argument, where you give up the good for the perfect. If the perfect's unattainable, you should take the good. Well, he doesn't do that. He wants it all. Okay, very much an idealist. That's one of the dangers of having a preacher or a historian for a president, is you end up with this idea that perfection is attainable. This is a clip from D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, the movie I was telling you about, the silent film. And before it was shown to others, it was shown to Wilson. Now, it was shown to him because he was president, but it was kind of shown to him as a historian. Mr. President, what do you think of this movie? And he said, the white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. I think that gives us a lot of insight into the way Wilson saw the world. Okay, he is going to see the world in black and white terms. He is going to bring racism back to the White House, something that had left during the Roosevelt administration. I'm not a fan of Wilson, just to be fair to you. He's almost always ranked as one of the 5 greatest presidents by historians. He's always up there with, usually it's, you've got Jefferson, Washington, Lincoln, and usually Franklin, Roosevelt, and Wilson are the other 2. Well, I don't much care for the guy for a lot of reasons. Economically, he comes into power promising a lot of things to the American people. He says that he will tackle the triple wall of privilege. And what he means is the 3 things that protect the rich from the poor. He's going to take them on, and he's going to take that wealth from the rich and redistribute it to the poor. Well, we rose up in mass and liked this idea of take from the wealthy and give to the masses. So what does he mean by the triple wall of privilege? He says he's going to get rid of tariffs. Well, I'm with him on that. Getting rid of a tariff is a good idea. If you don't know, I know we've said it a million times, but a tariff is a tax on imported goods. Its purpose is to make foreign goods more expensive so you'll buy more American goods. In reality, it just makes everything more expensive. But he wants to tackle the tariffs. He also wants to go into banks and force banks to loan money out at cheap rates. He wants there to be laws passed saying how much money a bank can charge in interest, probably usury charge. And his logic behind this is the poor can't afford to build houses, and they can't afford to do this stuff because the evil banks are charging too much interest. Well, what he's not counting on is if the evil banks can't charge interest, they're not going to loan you money. There's not going to be any money out there for anybody. So they're not comprehending that idea. And he also wants to break up trusts, just like Theodore Roosevelt did. Now, if you want to know why the biggest reason I don't like Wilson is this next one. Dr. Thomas Woodrow Wilson is the guy that pushed through the graduated income tax. He pushes through the 16th Amendment. We had never had an income tax in this country for a long period of time. During the Civil War, we had an income tax for the duration of the war as an emergency power act. And the way that they were able to justify that was the president has certain powers that exist during times of emergency. When the war was over, it went away, and nobody thought we would have it again. Wilson brought it back. And we have had an income tax ever since. Now, an income tax in itself is bad to me, but it's not necessarily unconstitutional. But a graduated income tax is something different. What a graduated income tax is where you charge people a different interest rate, a different rate on their taxes depending on their income. And the more money you make, the higher percentage of your salary you pay in taxes. It's what we have today. At this point, it wasn't nearly as ridiculous as it is today. The top 10% paid about 30% of the income back then. Today, the top 1% pays about 80% of the income today. It's very, very large today. But the graduated income tax, if you just had to pay taxes, if you have a job, you probably just had to pay your taxes. Then you can thank Woodrow Wilson for that. He also pushed through the Federal Trade Commission Act, which empowered the president to investigate trusts on his own. This means the president could just look at a business and go, I think this business is working in restraint of trade, and he could order an investigation. That's kind of scary to me. Anytime you're taking the rights of a personal business away from its, taking their rights to make their own decisions away, that scares me. He pushed through the Clayton Antitrust Act. This was genius. This is how the Democrat Party captured the union vote, was the Clayton Antitrust Act. There are all these antitrust laws. Now, if you don't know what an antitrust law is, it's a law that prevents a business from operating in restraint of trade. Okay? You can't do practices that prevents competition. If you do, you can be busted under antitrust legislation. Well, some people argue that a union is a trust. Think about it. If everybody that works on the railroad has to be in the union, does the union not operate in restraint of trade? Does it not stop competition for jobs? Of course they do. Well, what the Clayton Antitrust does is it exempts unions from that forever. So management and business can't operate in restraint of trade legally, but the workers can organize and they can do it. Okay? So that's kind of a strange thing. It also emphasizes what was already really the law. It legalized picketing and work stoppages as tools that unions can use. Now, again, it was really already there. First Amendment already says you have the right to peaceably assemble, but it went through and it put it in statute. Okay? All right, let's talk about this cartoon a little bit, because I've seen this on the AP test, and I think I've seen it on the STAR test, but I'm not sure. But it's been on a few tests over the years. And it's kind of important. And if you were alive in 1914, 1915, this would have made perfect sense to you. But most of you have never seen a water pump like this. My great-grandmother had one when I was a kid. And every night she'd go out and she'd fill up a bucket and put it in the house. And the next morning go out and pour that water in the pump before she'd start. That was priming the pump. It caused the vacuum to seal so you could pump, okay? Well, that's what he's doing here, is he's pouring legislation into the pump. He's pouring it in to prime it. That means I'm making laws to prime the economic pump. And the thought is all these laws are going to cause the economy to flow real well like water flows, okay? So it would have been something very understandable to you in 1914, 15. Not so understandable today. But the thought here is these laws are going to spur the economy. Let's look at the kind of progressive laws that he pushes through. Because just as Theodore Roosevelt was a progressive, Wilson is our second progressive president, okay? We're going to have three that we're going to deal with. We're going to deal with Roosevelt, Wilson, and later the other Roosevelt. He pushed through the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916. This was very good for farmers. It was a program that made low interest rate loans to farms. Now, it wasn't the U.S. government actually making the loans, but what they did is the U.S. government guaranteed the loans for the banks. So the banks could then give high-risk farmers loans at a cheap rate. And in exchange, the U.S. government said if they default on it, we'll pay you. Okay? It gave them a safety net. Now, is that a good thing? I will say that economically it was very good for farmers. It was also probably unconstitutional, but it was very good for farmers, okay? That was eventually thrown out by the Supreme Court. La Follette pushes through the Siemens Act. I don't know if y'all are aware of this or not, but there's a law that once you get out of national waters, and for the U.S. it's 12 miles. If you get more than 12 miles off the coast, you're in international waters, and the laws of the United States no longer apply. Okay? This is what they call the law of the sea that happens. And what had always happened was, once you got out there, the ship's captains could pretty much do anything they wanted to. So your sailors were oftentimes worked nearly to death. And if you caused trouble, if you were troublesome on the ship, you just might not make it back to shore. They could just throw you overboard if they wanted to. And nothing they could do about it because it happened in international waters. This was kind of the rule for a long time. Well, what the Siemens Act does is it goes through and it says that any ship that flies the U.S. flag, that means if you're chartered in the United States, then your constitutional rights go with you on that ship. It's U.S. soil, okay? So we can't just abuse people and take their rights away because they're 12 miles out at sea. I think this is a good law, okay? It's got some downsides, but it's a good law. It does make freight charges skyrocket because all of a sudden, all those work laws that have been put in place during Wilson's administration apply. You've got to work them an 8 to 12 hour day. You can't work them 30 hours. You've got to pay overtime. You've got to, and it's going to make it cost more to get freight there. Long-term effects. Anybody ever, if you've ever been on a cruise, you go to the back of the ship. It almost never flies the U.S. flag. Most cruise lines are chartered in Honduras or the Bahamas, and the reason why is because they have laxer laws. Okay, nobody wants to have to follow this law. It's too strict for it. But that's a long-term effect of this. The Working Man's Compensation Act. This goes out there in 1960, which granted federal assistance to civil service employees that would sometimes be laid off seasonally. Like if you were a tax collector, they only needed you for so many months out of the year, and they would lay you off in the parts they didn't need you. Well, this allowed you to get basically unemployment insurance, okay? This was ruled unconstitutional. And the Adamson Act, still around today. This is a big one. This is an important one. You need to know this one if you have a job. The Adamson Act established an 8-hour work day, and legally, if you work more than 40 hours a week, it says 8-hour work day, but it's considered to be a 40-hour week, 8 hours over 5 days. You have to be paid time and a half for everything over that. Now, I will tell you that a lot of businesses ignore this law, and a lot of kids let them ignore this law because they don't know it. But legally, after 40 hours, unless you're unless you're paid salary or you're paid piecemeal, which means I pay you so much to do a job, everything over that 40 hours a week, you have to be paid time and a half.
Does per diem become time and a half too?
Per diem does not have to become time and a half. No. All right. So now we're going to shift a little bit to a world history class. And it's going to seem weird because we're going to talk about Germany and all these other places. But you can't understand World War I in a vacuum, okay? So we've got to look at what goes on in the world, and we got to kind of back up a little bit and look at about a 50-year time period with what was happening, okay? And see if you can put the pieces together and understand why this war almost had to happen, okay? It was almost an unavoidable war. Back in 1871, Kaiser Wilhelm, the leader of Prussia, the largest of the German states, there was no country called Germany yet at this time. There was a bunch of little German states. Prussia was the biggest one. Kaiser Wilhelm gets in the Franco-Prussian War over a place called Alsace-Lorraine. Now, Alsace-Lorraine is this little area on the border of Germany and France. Here's the weird part about it. The people there are ethnically German. And historically, for most of history, they have been German. But Culturally, they spoke French. They tended to be Roman Catholic instead of Protestant. They ate French-style food. They were French people culturally. Now the question is, which country should they belong to? Germany says they should be Irish, they're ethnically German. France says they should be Irish, they're culturally French. Huh. Well, this war gets pretty violent. France comes out the victor in this first one. Alsace-Lorraine remains part of France, but Germany will not forget this. Okay, that's back in 1871. In 1882, Germany starts creating an alliance. If you don't know what an ally is, it's somebody that makes a mutual pledge to defend each other. The Triple Alliance is Italy, Germany, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. These three countries agree that if anyone attacks any one of those countries, that the others will come in to defend them. They've made a defense alliance, kind of like we have today with NATO, okay? Or the Soviet Union had with the Warsaw Pact for so long. So keep that in mind. There's this alliance back there. And then in 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm II starts building a modern navy. Now, what's interesting to me about this is, at the time they started doing this, Germany did not have a seaport. Germany was landlocked on most of the areas, and where they weren't landlocked, the water wasn't deep enough to have a seaport. So what does it tell you about a country that doesn't have a seaport but starts building a modern navy? Anything?
They go into war.
They're planning on having a seaport soon, right? You don't build a navy if you're not planning on having a seaport. And the only way to get a seaport is to go to war with a navy, right? So it's on the horizon. Keep that in mind. By the way, that term Kaiser, that's not a name. That's the German version of Caesar. It's in Russian, it's Tsar, C-Z-A-R, T-S-A-R. It just means king, okay? So when you see Kaiser, it just means king. And then in 1908, we have a problem. Austria, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? Austria goes into a place called Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's where modern Yugoslavia is. Goes into Bosnia-Herzegovina and annexes it, just takes it. The Serbians are mad and the Russians are mad. The Serbians are mad because they want a nation called Serbia. They want to unite all the Serbian people from all these countries and create a brand new nation of Serbs. So they're mad that Austria is taking some of this land, where the people are Serbic, okay? Russia is mad because it makes Germany, which is a superpower, it puts them as neighbors of Russia. So what are we going to do? Well, we don't quite go to war yet, but a new alliance appears. It's called the Triple Entente. This time, it's Britain, France, and Russia that unite. So everything's in place. You have the Triple Alliance, Italy, Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia. And they've all agreed, if anybody attacks one of our allies, we're going to fight. Now that you've seen this, what would it take for a world war to break out? One of those countries to get attacked. If one of those countries gets attacked, the whole world's at war. Because these 6 countries are going to jump in, and they're major powers. Think about it. If Serbia gets, or Austria gets attacked, immediately, let's say Britain attacks Austria. What's got to happen? Italy and Germany have to come in and attack Britain. Well, now Because of that, France and Russia have to come in and attack Germany. We have 6 countries going to war because something small happened, okay? Keep that in the back of your mind. And we're going to see how the assassination of a really minor person led to World War I. This is Franz Ferdinand, not the bad band, okay? This isn't the emo band. This is the Archduke of Austro-Hungary. An Archduke means he's the next in line for the throne. He actually doesn't have any power, but he's next in line. And he and his wife, Princess Sophia, come to visit Sarajevo, the capital city of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And their thought was that if they just came and had a parade and showed the people of Bosnia how glorious the empire was, and the people got to see their Archduke, that they would accept them and everything would be fine. That may be the stupidest idea I've ever heard. You see, there was this group, this Serbian nationalist organization. Today we would call them terrorists. They would have called themselves patriots. They called themselves Black Hand. And their purpose was to kick the colonists out, the colonial power out, and establish Serbia as a country. So Black Hand starts meeting. And they hatch a plan. They're going to assassinate the Archduke. And it's amazing, the accidents that happen. This is one of those ones, if they wrote this in a movie, you'd all go, I don't believe this. This isn't believable. You got to make something else up. Here's the plan. They're going to stand along the parade route. They have 6 guys, and they're going to stand at different spots along the route. All of these guys are going to be armed. The first one is going to have a grenade. And as the Archduke comes through, they're going to throw a grenade and create chaos. When the grenade goes off, the others are going to start firing. And we're going to kill the Archduke and as many other people as we can in order to set off this this revolution there. Well, first thing happens is they hear rumors that this is going to happen. So what are we going to do about these rumors? What are we going to do? Well, the Archduke decides, I'm going to go ahead and have a parade anyway, but, you know, let's see what happens. We're going to be very safe with this. And he comes through, and the guy pulls the grenade pin, and he throws the grenade, and it fails to explode. The chaos never happens. Eventually, somebody does fire a shot, and they're going to rush themselves away. The parade's going to escape, and all the killers that are down at the end of the parade route are not going to get to take their shot. So they've lost their big chance. By the way, one of the Archduke's men was killed in the melee early on, but it's not nearly as violent as they thought they were going to be. When it's over with, the Archduke decides that he's going to go to the hospital to visit the person that was wounded during this parade. And just by coincidence, they're taking a route through the cities. And as this guy, Gavrilo Princip, he was a member of Black Hand, as he is coming out of a sandwich shop with his pistol in his pocket, sad because he didn't get to shoot the Archduke, just as he steps outside, the Archduke comes across in an open carriage. Princip pulls his gun out, fires, kills the Archduke and Sophia. He's killed by the prince's guards immediately. All these coincidences had to happen. But now you have Serbia has assassinated the heir to the throne. There has to be repercussions. So what do you do? Well, Austro-Hungary gives them a 48-hour ultimatum. You ever been given an ultimatum? Boy, I have. That's where your mother says do this or else, or your wife says do this or else. That's more likely for me. The 48-hour ultimatum was, you have to do all of these things in 48 hours, or we're coming in with tanks and we're taking your whole country. We're not just taking Bosnia. We're not just taking this small part. We're taking all of it. Okay? So 48 hours, what do they have to do? First, they have to suppress all publications in the nation that are against Austro-Hungary. If they're anti-empire, they have to be suppressed. So they got 48 hours to stop every newspaper, magazine, book, anything that says anything bad about the empire. Can you do that in 48 hours? No, you can't do that in 48 hours. It's not possible. Next, and I love this, they have to go to the schools and they have to fire all the teachers that are against the empire. Any teacher that's ever said anything bad about the empire has to be fired. That'd be tough. That would be tough. Could you imagine that today? I wouldn't be here tomorrow. Okay? Third, you have to dismiss all officials that are against the empire. Any government official that's against the empire has to be fired. And finally, anybody that's caught has to be shipped to Austro-Hungary to stand trial for the crimes they commit. So they don't even get to stand trial in their own country. All of this in 48 hours. Is it even possible? No. It is completely impossible. So why did they give them an impossible ultimatum? Well, this is so they can go to the world and go, hey, we told them what they could do. We gave them a way out. They didn't do it. And now they can be justified in coming in with their tanks. World War I is going to start because of this. This is why we call this part of the world, the Balkans, the powder keg of Europe. It's where revolutions start. All right. So, what are the causes of World War I? Some of these we have seen for a while. We've talked about them during the Theodore Roosevelt lecture. But they're pretty important. First big one is imperialism. The fact that Germany doesn't even exist as a country until after our Civil War, so the 1870s. It's going to be late in getting into the empire game. So for it to have colonies, it's going to have to go to war against other European nations, okay? So that's going to push them to want to go to war. Next is militarism. There was a genuine belief in the nation that you had to have particularly a giant navy to be effective as a country. That was Alfred Thayer Mahan's whole argument. No great nation had ever existed without a large navy. Well, we built these giant military machines. And you've heard me use the example before. When you get a new gun at Christmas, what do you want to do immediately? I want to go out and kill something, okay? Well, imagine if you got a new army. What do you want to do? I want to go out and kill something, okay? And that's what we did. We built these giant militaries, and now we feel the need to justify them. The third is nationalism. Now, guys, nationalism in and of itself is not a bad thing, okay? I'm a nationalistic guy. I think it's good to be proud of your country. But nationalism is too often paired with racism, particularly in this time period. And it can lead to some really dangerous actions. And particularly the Germans of this time period, their nationalism was very, very racist. Okay? Not as much as it was in World War II, but still their nationalism was very racist. And the most important one is the alliance system. Okay? The fact that all these alliances had existed meant that it was almost unavoidable that we go to war. So let's look at the teams. The Central Powers, the bad guys, the guys with the black hats, okay? Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria, the old Ottoman Empire, and then Italy with a question mark. Anybody know why Italy has a question mark? They're in a unique place in history. They're the only nation in the history of the world that has never lost a war. Not because they're big, bad, and tough, but because they change sides when they start losing. That's what happens here. They're going to start off a bad guy and end up a good guy. They're going to start off on one and end up on the other. Okay? So here are the ones that we're going to end up fighting against, although it's by no means a certain at this time. The Allied powers. Great Britain, France, and Russia are the big ones. The United States got in the last year of the war. Well, we had to get in. Italy gets in about the same time the U.S. gets in. And then there were 32 other countries that, sent a tank. They did a little something, okay? But Britain, France, Russia are the big ones in this one. So why are we neutral? Why do we stay out of it for so long? There's a lot of reasons that we don't like to talk about. First off, we were afraid of a European war. We didn't want to play Europe's game. They had been fighting a war for generations, for decades, and centuries sometimes. We didn't want to be that country. We had also always had a historic neutrality. Think about it. Washington and Jefferson had both warned that we should stay out of foreign affairs. And we had largely stayed out of foreign affairs, with the exception of the Spanish-American War and the invasion of Hawaii. We pretty much left other countries alone. Well, I guess Mexican War too. But compared to other countries, we're not going to do it this time. We're going to get dragged into this. The one that your textbook doesn't mention, and it bothers me that it doesn't, is the third one here, ethnic plurality. There were a lot of Americans that were German. A lot. And a lot of Americans thought we should join World War I on Germany's side, because that's where their family was from. Okay? So there is no way to tell at the start of this what we would do. And finally, the last one is one we don't like to talk about because it's kind of a dark spot. We were selling guns to both sides during the war. We were getting rich off the war. And if we get into the war, we probably should stop selling guns to the guys that are going to be shooting at us. Okay? So, we stayed neutral for a long time. And probably would have continued to stay neutral. Except Wilson realized that it's not really possible. President Wilson ran for re-election in 1916, promising to keep us out of war. In fact, that was his campaign platform. His campaign slogan was, "Vote Wilson, he kept us out of war." And he promised no Americans would die on foreign soil. The whole time, he was writing up a plan to go to war with Germany. Okay? America wasn't ready to go to war, but President Wilson was. What is going to allow us to go there are the actions of Germany. Germany is going to develop a heinous new weapon called the U-boat, the underwater boat, the submarine, okay? But what the submarines did, they're really not that efficient or effective. These were single hull submarines. They didn't have two hulls. They were just a single hull. And if you could sink a submarine with a pistol in those days. If you could put a hole in it, the water would rush in and people would die because it was single hull. And they were slow. The only way they were effective is sneak attacks with torpedoes. But that was kind of against the rules of war. Did y'all know there are rules to warfare? There really are. And the old rules of naval warfare were that a ship would pull up next to you, you would get side by side. If it's time to go to war, you would fire a warning shot over the bow of the ship. And that was telling them, I intend to fight you. And that gave you a chance to either surrender, or if you were going to fight, they would take all non-essential personnel, put them on boats, send them out, and then just the essential personnel would fight. So when the ship sunk, everybody didn't die. Sometimes the enemy would go pick up the other people and return them afterwards. I mean, it was a very gentlemanly way to fight. Submarines don't work that way. They tried. They built these subs, and they went up there after England. And I would love to have seen this, because they rose up with their submarine. They fired a shot over the bow of the English ship. And remember, they're slow, very slow. The English ships didn't even waste bullets. They would just turn and run over the submarine. That's how they would sink. They just run them over. So what the Germans started doing is they stopped making the warning shots, and instead they started just shooting. It's called unrestricted submarine warfare. Just sneak attacks. Well, the world called foul. You can't do that. It's ungentlemanly. You can't do that. Well, it's all okay until February 5th of 1917, when a German U-boat sunk the HMS Lusitania. That means His Majesty's ship, a British cruise ship. It's not even a freighter, it's a cruise liner full of passengers, and they sunk it. And there were Americans on board. And now we're furious. We are ready to go to war. Germany very quickly realizes their mistake, and they make the Sussex Pledge, where they promise never to use unrestricted submarine warfare again. It's not going to work. They're going to end up having to do it. But America is now primed for war. By the way, we found out later that the British were actually smuggling guns on the Lusitania. They were using the passengers as human shields, believing that the Germans would never sink a cruise ship with civilians on it. So the British had, in fact, turned it into a legitimate target by doing that. And then there's the last straw, the straw that breaks the camel's back. The British intercepted a telegram from a German ambassador named Zimmerman to the president of Mexico. By the way, to show some respect to Mexico, they did not accept the conditions. But Germany offered in the Zimmerman telegram that if Mexico would declare war on the United States, would join the war on the side of Germany, and declare war on the U.S., when the war was over, Germany would help Mexico regain all of its lost territories. Now that might not sound like a big deal, but we have another name for the lost territories. We call it Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, California. Okay? The whole American Southwest. England is smart. They intercept this, but instead of just taking the telegram and giving it to the president, they take the telegram and they send it to every major newspaper in the United States. So we wake up one morning and we read our newspaper and discover that Germany is trying to give half of the United States to Mexico. How mad would you be if you woke up this morning and read in the Dallas Morning News that Germany was trying to return Texas to Mexico? She's pretty furious. Well, Americans were, and we're ready to go to war. So we did. On April 2nd of 1917, we declared war on Germany. But here's the problem. Wilson gives his reasons for declaring war. He says, we must make the world safe for democracy. That is a beautiful quote. I love that quote. I love the idea that we're going to war for a principle as sacred as democracy. But here's the problem. If that's your reason for going to war, what has to happen for you to declare victory? The whole world's got to be a democracy. He set a standard that was so high, you could never win. You could never complete the standard. Kind of like when George Bush went to war against terror. If that's your goal, you can't win. Okay? This was the first modern war. We dug trenches, and we fought between these trenches, where sometimes you would spend years fighting, and you'd gain a foot. Okay? This is a terrible, terrible war. It's the first war to use tanks. The Germans invented the tank. Our tanks were not very good. We tried building a tank in World War I, and we drowned the whole crew trying to cross a river. It wasn't effective. We used poison gas. We used water-cooled machine guns, belt-fed machine guns. Planes were used, although mostly for spying. You look at these pictures up here. These are some of the tools from World War I. That is not a beekeeper's outfit, although it kind of looks like one. That's what you would wear if you were operating a flamethrower, and they used flamethrowers extensively. There's bayonets up there. There's landmines up there. There's flare guns. All of these things were being used. If you could imagine the first war where they had these flamethrowers that pumped diesel and flames down, and they would put it into the trenches and just pump the diesel in and then spark it and burn everybody inside to crispy critters. This is a terrifying, terrifying weapon, okay?
That'd be intimidating looking at that mine.
The Germans had built what they called the Hindenburg Line, which was this line of pillboxes. It was these bunkers with machine guns in them, and they believed that they were unbreakable. The Hindenburg Line cannot be broken. And they tried for years to break it. But they had so much faith in this line that they put nothing behind it. And if you see how effective it was, on November 7th of 1918, we broke the Hindenburg Line. That was the 7th. On November 11th, we captured all of Germany and they surrendered. 4 days from the time we broke their unbreakable line to capturing their whole country, because they didn't have anything behind it, okay? They didn't understand how war had changed. That line was built for another time period. So November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day. Today we call it Veterans Day, right? The 11th month, the 11th day, at 11 o'clock, they signed the peace treaty. We still celebrate that today. If you probably have never noticed it, but church bells ring all over the world at 11 o'clock on November 11th. We had a relatively painless war. We were in for 1 year. 1 year the U.S. was in. And look at this. 126,000 Americans died in 1 year. 230,000 were wounded. Imagine if you were France or you were Germany. They literally lost a whole generation. A whole generation of men died. It's going to take 40 years for England to regain its pre-World War I population. Amazing stuff when you think about it. All right. When we come back next time, we will finish this lecture. We'll talk about how we organized America for war. We'll talk about the communists in Russia and see what happens. And I will have you a study guide or a thank you for your test. Your test will be